So I really don't have that same safety net or safety blanket at the moment. And I also kind of wonder if this is maybe just the future of Flesh and Blood to some degree.
And what do you think about the heroes that are already there? How could these be elaborated in the new meta?
I think that the ice heroes were really shaping the metagame and sort of setting the pace of play. I think the biggest thing about that is like...
Welcome to Draw 4, where I draw 4 with the best Flesh and Blood players. Today I am talking to Yuki Lee Bender about why Flesh and Blood will never be the same. Yuki, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be joining you.
So we have a spicy topic because actually the hero that you played at the World Championship is Iyslanders Stormbind. And she just recently went off to Living Legend. And we will reveal 4 topics regarding Iyslanders Stormbind and the correlations that now happen in the metagame. The first thing I want to talk with you about is what actually did she impact when she entered the CC metagame throughout the time that she was legal?
Yeah, so I think Iyslander generally kind of promoted relatively fair Flesh and Blood, interactive Flesh and Blood, where you need to be able to play a longer game, do some blocking, play through some disruption, some back and forth. She wasn't doing these big 25-30 damage turns that just kind of put your opponent so far behind that the game's over. It was a much more slow, methodical gameplay. And I think in terms of the deck building, it really made decks have things like extra blues in their sideboard, maybe flexibility with their resource curve. You couldn't play a deck like the old Lightning Briar deck that was pretty much all red line, a handful of blues, and your plan is just to play pitchless. And some decks, even like Bolton, that wanted to be primarily reds and yellows, really struggled. So I think decks are going to have more flexibility with their resources, and I think in particular, the aggro decks that really like to have the lean resource curves and just as efficient as possible are going to have a better time probably going forward into this meta without having to worry about, all the frostbites, the discard, and everything that Iyslander could be throwing at them.
So deck building was inherently impacted by Iyslander being legal for the classic constructed format. You already mentioned like decks like FAB, Bolton, and so on. They needed to prepare for exactly this matchup, Iyslander being a true outstanding hero in the metagame. And how would you say that back then when Iyslander was entering the metagame, those decks needed to be flexible and adapting to exactly this, what Iyslander was bringing to the table?
Yeah, I would say that's exactly the case. You'd see a lot of things like extra blues floating around in the sideboard, energy potion in the sideboard, extra arcane barrier in the sideboard. So there's all these little pieces that you need to have for Iyslander, and I think it made certain decks stronger options than others. Like we've kind of seen recently, we saw Ninja do really well at Worlds, but prior to Worlds, Ninja was kind of not on the radar. I think Lexi was part of that, Iyslander was part of that, but also we saw a lot of people favoring aggro decks like Dash, for example, the original Dash, that have a lot more flexibility, and they have extra resources they can put into their gun if they need to, and then if you don't tax them, they can just put it into their gun. Yeah, those decks that were a little bit more flexible were kind of more favored, and I think the really lean aggro decks are the ones we're going to see going forward doing well.
Yeah. So we also had other ice heroes available throughout Iyslander's legal time, and that basically were Oldhim and also Lexi. So what was the unique standout of Iyslander compared to those decks in the metagame?
So I think that Iyslander was probably the most disruptive of the bunch. Things like Insidious Chill, Aether Ice Vein, Coronet Peak meant that you were constantly dealing with taxes and discard. She could give you frostbites on your turn, whereas the other heroes, the frostbites were kind of more face up. You kind of knew what you were getting into, whereas Iyslander, you're constantly on your toes and having to kind of adapt throughout your turn and plan for all these different possible scenarios. And Channel Lake Frigid is a good card, but I think that it was exceptional in Iyslander when you could play it on your opponent's turn and kind of get almost an extra turn out of it. And in Oldhim and Lexi, it was never as much of a powerhouse as it was in Iyslander. So Iyslander was really the most disruptive and maybe the most flexible of them. She could kind of play a longer game. She could build towards a combo. She could play kind of like a tempo game. There was a lot of ways that Iyslander could adapt. Relatively, I'd say that like Oldham was a much more defensive leaning ice deck. He was really good at blocking and playing a super, super long game and kind of stonewalling his opponents. And then Lexi on the other end was a much more proactive and aggressive hero. Not that Iyslander isn't proactive in her own right, but Lexi had those really explosive Rain Razors, 3-of-a-kind turns, pushing 20 plus damage, which, as we mentioned, isn't really an Iyslander's range. Maybe if they set up the combo, they can do a big turn like that, but it's a lot of setup. You really have to build up to it, whereas Lexi can just go, I got the right combination of cards, let's go. I'm going to do a bunch of damage and kind of, take control of the game in a very like proactive measure. So it's kind of how I would compare those different ice decks. They're all disruptive, but different ranges in terms of like how proactive versus defensive they are.
So then we also have the comparison. Iyslander was entering the game, we only had one wizard, and that was also a true standout because at the time we met the first time at Pro Tour New Jersey, Kano was the only wizard available to the CC metagame, and there at Pro Tour New Jersey, Kano was brought but was not expected as much, and with Iyslander entering the metagame, people needed to prepare on a regular basis to face wizards, but also arcane damage combined with physical damage. So how would you compare now that Iyslander is gone, how people view wizards?
Yeah, I think Kano by comparison is a much more explosive deck, much more glass cannon, kind of has that big combo kill that can come at any moment, and you never know if you never really can count Kano out of the game until he's actually dead, because on that last turn he could just blow you up. Iyslander is a lot more stable compared to that. Higher life total, gets to play some of the like a little bit more armor, gets to gain some life with Findle's Fighting Spirit, Heart of Findle, has the disruption to slow the game down. So Iyslander was a much more fair deck, playing a very gradual, like incremental value game and then closing the game out with Stormstriders, and when the life totals were very low, but she really had to kind of like earn it. She had to get to that end game, and then that was where she won. Whereas Kano was much more like a true like combo deck in a sense. Like he would just race the aggro decks by blowing them up before they blow him up. So quite different in that regard. And I think that going forward, if you want to beat Kano, I think the best things is like Spell Void is really good for a lot of decks because you don't have to have resources available to Spell Void, and it stops the Aether Wildfire really well. Whereas against Iyslander, often having Arcane Barrier or things like Energy Potion to play around the disruption was kind of more key. So the way that you combat those is a little bit different. Also, cards like Oasis are really, really good into Kano because you can shut down their Wildfire, assuming that you can find it in time. Whereas they don't do as much into Iyslander, who just kind of wants to chip away, and maybe you stop an Ice Vein, but it's not, it's usually not the end of the world for her. She can kind of play through it.
All right, so I think we already talked in detail about the comparison of which heroes were available that are similar to Iyslander, but the second topic I want to bring up is actually your connection to Ice, because I also saw your post on Twitter regarding that, and so can you please at first introduce what you were saying on Twitter, but then let's talk about that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, so I have a big affinity for Ice. I was really excited to see Lexi announced, just like I already liked Azalea. Ranger was my favorite class, and then seeing Ice Ranger was really, really exciting. For anyone that doesn't know, my name Yuki in Japanese means snow, and my parents actually chose this name for me because I'm born in January. In our area, we do get not the harshest winters, but we get some snow a little bit here and there, and I've always liked the snow and going skiing and things like this. The winter is something that I really enjoy. Snow is something that I really enjoy, and I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but in games I usually like ice as an element compared to the others. I like the kind of the things that are associated with it, slowing your opponents down, crowd control, all that kind of stuff. It's usually appealing in a large variety of games, and the same holds true for Flesh and Blood. I really like how they've kind of embodied that with the Frostbites, with the Discard, with the Blizzards and Channel Lake Frigids. So ice is an element that I was really excited about coming out. And the more that I played with it, the more that just kind of held true. And I think it's a certain kind of a play style, right? Where it's very interactive. You're thinking about what your opponent is doing and how to keep them off of their game. And that's something that I really enjoy, both as the Ice Hero and actually playing against the Ice Heroes as well. I've found that even when I'm playing other decks, playing into like Iyslander is very thoughtful and very interesting, because you have to kind of consider like so many options of like what could happen. How do I play around as much as possible, but don't play around so much that I'm falling behind? There's like a lot of risk assessment and kind of like prediction about how the rest of the turn or the future turns are going to play out. And that part is, I think, kind of unique to the Ice Heroes in particular.
You already mentioned that when Lexi was announced, you were so stoked for the mechanics to be enrolled. But then you also had so many months, even over a year now, to leverage on this mechanics. What do you think makes it so unique in a way that people need to interact with the hero, but also for some it is like a love-hate relationship, right? Some people really hated Frostbites to be in the game and now are really happy to that mechanic being gone.
Yeah, so I think it comes down to how you like to play the game or what you think good games of Flesh and Blood look like. Ice can definitely be frustrating. I've been on the other side of it and been frustrated. And I think the biggest thing about that is like, you have this deck, you look at your hand, you go, okay, this hand's awesome. Here's what I want to do with this hand. And then they play a channel like Frigid, or they make you discard cards, or they give you a bunch of Frostbites, and all of a sudden you're completely off your plan and you have to adapt, and your turn is probably much worse than you originally had hoped. And so I think that that's kind of like the source of frustration for a lot of people, is feeling like your plans are being ruined, feeling like you have to keep changing what you're doing and you don't get to play your cards. You don't get to play like your deck the way that it wants to play. You have to play it in a different way to kind of adapt and play around all these disruptive effects that you're being thrown. On the other hand, I think the reason that I like Ice, and I hope to see Ice Heroes return at some point, is that I think that they promote really interactive Flesh and Blood, kind of like I mentioned at the start. There's back and forth. There's sometimes, because you're being disrupted, you choose to block more. The games last a little bit longer. And I really enjoy this kind of Flesh and Blood where it's highly, highly interactive. I think that's, for me, that's when Flesh and Blood is the most fun. I think that, you know, thinking back to like some of the previous metas we had, especially like the Stubbies Fi meta that we had before, where you know, whichever Fi gets to attack you for 40 first and make you just block the rest of the game is kind of the one that wins. And there's a lot of, I'm not going to say there's no blocks, because of course there was strategic blocking in those matchups, but you're really, really hoping not to block in a lot of those matchups. Like, you really want to keep your hand because your deck is so much better at attacking than blocking. Like, a lot of your cards attack for 4, block for 2. So you're really hoping not to block. And I just find that sometimes that feels almost like two ships passing in the night. You're kind of like, I'm playing my game, you're playing your game, and we'll see who's faster. And to me, that's not so interesting. I like it when I feel like I have to think about what my opponent's doing, and they have to think about what I'm doing, and we have to kind of have this back and forth in this longer, more involved game where we're kind of playing off of what each other are doing constantly. And I think Ice really, it's not the only way to promote that, but I think that this disruption is a big way to promote that kind of gameplay.
So Ice is not only a unique mechanic, but also, like you elaborated, is having a deep impact on the deck building, but then also allows really unique ways to come up with new strategies or find new ways to interact with your opponent during the game rather than just racing them down. Mm-hmm. So now that we don't have these mechanics anymore and Iyslander is gone, we will for sure see a shift. But before we dive into that a little bit deeper, I actually want to bring up the third topic, and that is you playing Iyslander actually at the last World Championship in Barcelona. And the first crazy thing is that last year's World Championship was won by Michael Hamilton on Iyslander on a really unique build. And even in this World Championship, a year later, she had so high stakes to actually being able to win the tournament. But like we all know, Fi won the tournament by Alex from Greece. But let's talk about your experience on Iyslander, the last frosty ride, so to say, that you had with her.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually played Iyslander at the first World Championship, so it's funny to wind up on her again at the second World Championship. Honestly, I wasn't even sure I was going to bring Iyslander to Barcelona at all. I packed a number of decks. I think I had Fi in there, Original Dash, Bravo. I forget who else. Anyways, I had a number of decks in there, and Iyslander was not amongst them. And I was feeling really not great about the event about a week out, to be honest. I was feeling pretty unprepared, and I was just kind of like, every deck has some bad matchups, has some good matchups. It feels like it depends what you think will show up, what does well, and just kind of like what matchups you get on the day. And I ended up feeling like, well, maybe I should just be trying Iyslander, because that's the hero that I know the best by far, like discounting Lexi, of course, because she's not on the table anymore. And when I started testing it, I realized that I think the Dromai matchup, which I had kind of written off as being really, really poor before, had gotten a lot better now that they've gotten Tome, more 2 blocks, less blues. It's easier to kind of find. It's not an easy matchup, but you have more roads to victory than you did kind of towards the end of the Lexi meta, where I think the matchup was actually pretty terrible for you. All of that actually ended up making me feel pretty confident about the Iyslander pick, and I went from feeling really unprepared for the event to feeling like I was kind of on a comfort pick and really glad to bring her to what might be her last event, right? She didn't LL at Worlds, as it turns out. She got close. Xing almost got her there. But regardless, it still did end up being my last event on her, because she's now Living Legend at the Battle Hardened the week after, and I haven't gotten to play a big event since then. So I was really glad to take her out for one more event, and she performed wonderfully for me. I went 7-1 in Swiss. I don't even think I got my good matchups, to be honest. Like, the matchup I think you really want to see is Bravo. You also would like to see Ninjas. Interestingly enough, I did lose to a Ninja in the top 8, but that is how it goes. Even if it's a good matchup, you can still lose, and Alex played very, very well. He had some very timely blues, and yeah, he ran me over. But overall, the deck was great. I played into some hard matchups, the Dashes, the Dromais, the Azaleas, things that I wasn't hoping to play. But one of the things that I love about Iyslander so much is that there's so much room for skill expression and so much room to find wins even in those hard matchups. And you always have some road to victory, even if it's an uphill one. Yeah, I was thrilled with my deck choice, really enjoyed playing her, and I'm glad I got to take her to one last big event, even if it didn't quite go the way I wanted to. It was still, an excellent weekend for me, and I'm really happy with that.
Yeah, I think before the top 8, it was really amazing to see how you went in the tournament. Can you explain like how it felt for you when going into the top 8 before playing against Alex and having this amount of success in the tournament?
Yeah, I was feeling very confident. I had a lot of momentum going in. 6-0 in draft and 7-1 in constructed is about as good as it gets. Couldn't really ask for better. My only loss was to Xing, actually, who eventually played in the finals and lost to Alex as well on Iyslander. So my one loss was to the Mirror. But I was feeling, very confident, very good about my play and my decisions. I felt like I was playing very clean, and obviously had some things go my way as well. I think that's always the case in strong tournaments. I got lucky in the right spots, or opponents have made small mistakes, which is easy to do when you're playing a long day, and I was able to capitalize on them. Things were just really going my way. I was feeling really good about the tournament, and so going into top 8, I was feeling great. In top 8 itself, I honestly still have some regrets. I'm like a little bit, it stings a little bit, mostly just, Alex played really fantastically, and honestly, his hands were great. They really lined up well, and I don't know if I could have won no matter what I did, but I do think that I sort of had a couple small mistakes that at least would have made the game a little bit closer. Again, it's hard to say what would happen. The whole game changes if you change a play at the second or third turn or so. But yeah, I have some regrets about that. The turn I played the Channel Lake Frigid in particular, I think I didn't really make good decisions, and that just kind of stings, since it was such an incredible run, and I don't mind losing, but I'd like to lose knowing that I did the best that I can, and I don't feel like that's the case, but it is what it is. I'm still really happy with the weekend overall, of course.
So you touched on a very important moment in the top 8 where you played the Channel Lake Frigid, and as you already said, Iyslander and these in game plans an advanced mechanic to run when going into a tournament. Now that ice is gone, we already talked about it. Do you think going into the future you will chase for another really complex deck to master at first before bringing to a tournament like the World Championship?
We'll see. I usually try and bring the deck that I think is best for the event. I think I do tend to prefer these more interactive decks that have like a tempo element. I think Lexi and Iyslander both have an element of getting tempo and holding tempo. Prism, another deck that I played a lot, also does, not through disruption, but by forcing people to interact with her board and her spectras. So I do really like that playstyle. It's something that I find really interesting in the game, and if I can find a strong option for that, I would love to do it. I'm just not sure what that looks like currently. So I'm feeling a little bit out of sorts, not totally sure what to play, but I'm excited to explore different options and maybe try something different, maybe like a Guardian could end up doing that. I'm kind of curious if heavy hitters. Bravo's like he's close, but not quite there. Maybe there could be some interesting Guardian stuff. Or maybe I try something totally different, play aggro for a little bit and see how that goes. But yeah, right now I'm sort of just trying things out, pretty open to whatever, but I would like to I do kind of hope that there's another like tempo-ish, disruptive or interactive deck down the road. And if there is and it seems viable, that's probably what I would like to play.
So this time that we are going in now is pretty interesting because as a pro player on a stake like you are, you need to have experiences in different heroes, but for sure you have these favorite ones. Like for you, it is Lexi or Iyslander. And is it for you personally that not only you need to be open, but you have some void now that Iyslander and Lexi both are gone, but for sure you have these hopes on finding a new hero that you really like in the future?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a tricky spot. I think I've been sort of spoiled lately where I had put in a lot of reps into both Lexi and Iyslander, and they were at different times very, very good picks. And a lot of what that allowed me to do was in testing, try everything else and then go, a week or two before the event, go, okay, this isn't working, or I haven't found something that I like. I'm going to go back to Lexi, or I'm going to go back to Iyslander, and feeling like, adjust the deck, brush up on some of the matchups that I expect to see and feel pretty confident because I played it so much. So I really don't have that same safety net or safety blanket at the moment. I'm hoping that maybe in the off season I can familiarize myself with some heroes, and I'm sure that I can pick things up. I feel pretty confident in my ability to pick things up, but yeah, I feel like I don't have that like ace in my pocket, so to speak, that I can just fall back on and really rely on. So it is going to be an adjustment period. And I also kind of wonder if this is maybe just the future of Flesh and Blood to some degree, with living legend points going faster, weekly living legend checks. Good heroes aren't going to be around for as long, it feels like. It might be a lot more picking up new decks, adapting, learning things on the fly, and it might just be a little bit of a different way of engaging with the game, and I'm excited for that challenge and to see what that will look like. It's very different from how I've engaged with the game, so I'm not in my comfort zone, but I'm excited for the challenge.
Yeah, definitely. There's not only Iyslander gone now and the second World Championship is over, but the Living Legend system has changed a little bit at least. And going forward in 2024, we will have the first meta without ice heroes being a relevant choice, but also new heroes are closely up on the horizon that will shake up the meta again, and people need to adapt to that. So for pro players who want to be at the next World Championship, it is definitely a new year to enjoy, but also to explore. And that has some highs, but also some lows that you already explained to us. Let's go forward to the fourth topic that we want to talk about. And that is now Iyslander leaving the CC meta, and we will going to next set heavy hitters. So you already touched on it. It is not that easy to pick a new hero now and learn, but for players that have been in Flesh and Blood, how can you describe how it will be? Because you are also on a pro team now, the Stroop Raffles, right? The testing will change up quite a bit with no ice heroes, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been with Stroop Waffles for a while. They're really just a group of friends, and It's sort of funny because we got team T-shirts made, and a few people were going, "We're a team? I thought we were just hanging out and playing games." So I guess it's a matter of what you consider a team or not. But yeah, no, I enjoy playing with my friends a lot, and we practice it together a ton. But anyways, yeah, I'm sure it will change up the testing a lot. I'm a little bit not sure what to think of the upcoming meta. I'm trying to keep an open mind. I hope it doesn't get too fast. I think that the really, really fast aggressive metas have been my least favorite to play in. Briar meta around Lille. I had Prism. I enjoyed playing Prism, but that meta overall was not my favorite metagame. And the Lightning Briar metagame right when Tails came out around the first national season was like also... I found Lexi and I enjoyed playing Lexi in that meta a lot, but overall, like the Lightning Briar meta I didn't think was super great. And I'd say the same thing about Stubby's Fi, so I tend to not like these really fast metas, and I hope that I'm nervous that the game will speed up too much, but I'm also a little, I'm sure LSS has plans. I'm sure there are things coming. We have heavy hitters coming with a new Guardian. Maybe the Guardian can slow the game down, but I do hope that there's something there that can play a long game. And yeah, I think everybody's kind of excited to explore this new metagame. There's some events coming up in the weeks to come, and I think everybody's sort of going to be watching those really closely, even if they're taking some downtime before heavy hitters launches, just to kind of see what decks are doing well, what can you expect to see, because right now it feels like really wide open. People always kind of say this, like when there's Living Legend, it feels like a huge shakeup, and I think that's true, but I think with both Lexi and Iyslander leaving in such quick succession and Ice being totally absent, it really is going to dramatically change how the metagame unfolds. Maybe similar to like when Prism left, where Prism was really kind of like shaping the metagame, keeping certain decks out. I think that the Ice Heroes were really shaping the metagame and sort of setting the pace of play, and to some degree, keeping aggro decks in check. So curious to see what it looks like. If I had to guess, I think it's going to be pretty aggressive, but we'll see.
Yeah. It is also an opportunity, I think, for players who want to innovate on those decks that are already out, because with Ice not being prevalent and not being a shakedown for some decks, there could be new strategies that can shine the first time maybe that players might be not expecting yet. And we even have this open variety in Flesh and Blood, like at the last battle, Hardened Katsu taking the win even though Iyslander was still prevalent. Of course, Fi is a deck to consider, and Bolton combo will be a lot easier to take off, for example. But how do you think about these new ways that people can explore now? And what do you think about the heroes that are already there? How could these be elaborated in the new meta?
Yeah, I think more than anything, decks are going to be able to be a little bit more focused. There's quite a few sideboard slots that open up for a lot of decks, not having to account for the Ice Heroes anymore. And I think it lets them focus in on their particular game plan and be kind of, I don't want to say more refined, because that makes it sound like people didn't know what they were doing before, but more just like a tighter focus and all their cards dedicated towards their strategy and pivoting to things, rather than having like just extra things to deal with not getting disrupted. So I think it's really exciting time. There's so much to explore. It's hard to say what will come out on top. I'm traveling to an event in Columbus, the Realm Games Invitational, this coming weekend, and we're kind of trying to figure out what decks might be good. And our conclusion so far, I think, is just a lot of decks might be good. I could see Dash, the original Dash, being really good. Maybe Dash IO if you can figure out the Guardian matchup. I think Bravo's in a pretty good spot, losing that Iyslander matchup, which was really bad for him. Maybe keeping those aggro decks under control. Ninja, of course, winning the World Championship and arguably one of your worst matchups being gone seems very promising for Ninja. Maybe even something like Bolton, like you said, where Iyslander was a really terrible matchup for you. And I think Levia similarly kind of struggled into the disruption of Ice. I could see Levia being a solid choice. So I think that there's a lot to explore and unpack, and I'm really curious to see how it will all unfold, because like you said, people are going to be innovating, people are going to be adjusting their lists and having more space without Ice in there, and it's hard to say like how all of that shakes out and interacts, but I'm very, very excited to try it, and I'm probably just gonna I'm not sure which hero I'm going to pick yet, but I'm probably going to try and bring something fun and see how it goes. And yeah, I'm excited. I'm very excited to see the kind of the new emerging metagame that we have on our hands.
All right, awesome. I wasn't aware that you are going to the Brawl, but I hope you have an amazing time there and can learn a lot of new ways to play Flesh and Blood. You already said it yourself. Now it is like kind of a new time, even though you are playing Flesh and Blood for so long. And that is really interesting to see and to play with all these games coming up. Now that we talked about the last topic, we have drawn 4 cards, but if you could arsenal a card here at the end of the video to give the viewers a last tip along their new journey without Ice and Iyslander being legal, what would it be?
I think that going forward with my guess is that going forward with the changes to Living Legend, with things moving so quickly and like heavy hitters bringing in 6 new heroes, I think they've told us 15 heroes this year. That's a lot of new heroes and a lot of heroes that are going to be gone. I think now more than ever, it feels like you should be playing the decks that you like and the decks that you're comfortable with and the decks you have experience on. I think there was a lot of metagames where that wasn't so true. Like the Starvo metagame, yes, there was multiple decks. You could bring Starvo, Chain, Prism, but it was really kind of those 3, maybe a couple outside picks like Lexi prior, but there was a lot of heroes you couldn't bring. And the biggest thing that strikes me right now, and you saw this even in the Worlds metagame, was just the top 8s are so diverse. We saw Fi, Iyslander, 2 different builds of Dash, Katsu in top 8. There was Reinar that almost top 8'd. There was a Dash IO in top 16 that I think you interviewed. I heard that there was a Levia on high tables. Like there's just a ton of heroes out there that are doing well. There were some Bravos in the top 32 or 16 as well. Like there's just a lot doing well. And of course, leading up to this, we had the calling in, was it Melbourne, where we had Uzuri win. So it just feels like more than ever, you can really be rewarded for knowing your deck inside and out, having really solid game plans into what you're expecting to see and kind of adapting to the metagame shifts as they happen, because it feels like almost week to week things are changing, both because of Living Legend and because people are seeing what happens in tournaments and then adapting their strategies and their deck lists accordingly. It's an exciting time to be playing Flesh and Blood, and I think don't be afraid to try things out and go with what you like or go with what you know, because I think that there's just so much that is unexplored. Like I don't know. I don't feel like I know where I'm going in this metagame at all, for example. So don't look to me, and I think probably don't look to most of. I'd imagine most of the like high level players would feel similarly, that it's really kind of it's like the Wild West. It's a big unknown, and don't be afraid to make your mark and take your shot if there's something that's been working for you. It could be a good thing.
Awesome. I think that is a really good seed to plant here at the end for all the players watching and going into the next meta game. Yuki, thank you so much for taking the time today and talk to me here at Tales of Wraith. And again, I'm really stoked for you that you had this amazing success at the World Championship.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure, and looking forward to seeing you at the next one.